'Cause you can't, you won't, and you don't stop. Or when you can't, you won't, and you don't stop.
So another kind of a business entity that we can have is a trust. So again, a trust is not a separate legal entity. It actually involves multiple people coming together, but its purpose is different. Really, it's the way that you can manage a business or property on behalf of someone else. So why don't we have a look at a trust? As we've said, a trust arises whenever someone called the trustee owns property for the benefit of someone else who are called the beneficiaries. So there's a long history behind them and how they came about that goes back in the common law to the Crusades, when landowners would leave the country for long periods of time, and how could you look after the land? Courts of Chancery, which you'll remember from weeks 3 and 4 was where the law of equity developed, came up with a kind of different solution. They decided that the legal owner of the land was the person who stayed, but the true or beneficial owner was actually the person who'd gone away. So they came up with this two kinds of ownership, right? Legal ownership and equitable ownership. And over time, it developed from that initial idea to expand to provide for people who couldn't look after their own property for various reasons. Initially, because perhaps they weren't allowed to own land, like we might not like to think about it, but there were lots of people who couldn't own land in England. Of course, women, but also many men couldn't own land as well. So if you wanted to take care of someone and they couldn't own the property, how would you do that? You could do it through a trust. And we still see trusts used that way today for people who maybe have an intellectual disability, or for minors, children, etc., before they come of age and can look after the property. Again, it extends beyond that. It is just not used for those kinds of people. It could be that you decide you don't want your children to have access to the property until they're 30. So you could specify that in a trust deed. There's nothing about them actually being children that's necessary for a trust. Nothing about them being minors that's necessary for a trust. However, that's generally how it's used, if we can think about that. So what you can see here is it's a different kind of ownership, not a separate legal entity. The legal owner is the trustee. So there's a lot of terms there that's worth having a look at so that we get across what's happening in a trust. So when we have a trust, someone sets the trust up. They're the settlor. The person who establishes the trust sets it up. They're the settlor. So, for instance, just say I wanted to set up a trust in case I, for instance, died and wanted to look after my kids. Then I would become the settlor. Now, I could decide who will look after the property. So I could have my kids here, kid 1, kid 2, kid 3 in my case. So we got these 2 kids. Then I could have someone look after that, right? So someone who I trusted could be the trustee. Now, obviously, first off, I'm going to put, say, my spouse there. Normally, I'd probably give them the property, but just in case I didn't want to, I wanted to go give it straight to the kids. Well, then my spouse could legally own the property, but they would have to use it for the benefit of my children. Okay, so that's how it happens. In business, there's a very famous trust, the Hancock, the trust involving Lang Hancock, right? So Lang Hancock was this guy, very big mining magnate from Western Australia. And he set up a trust with his property in terms of his grandchildren, right? So there was Gina, there was John, there was Ginia, and I think that there was 1 or 2 other kids, right? So there were these grandchildren of Lang Hancock, and he wanted his mining interests to eventually go to his grandkids, right? But they were very young when he actually died. So he made his daughter, Gina Reinhardt, right, the legal trustee. But remember, she should be managing these assets on behalf of the grandchildren, not on her own behalf. And there's been a bit of to-do in the press about that I won't go into, but you can look into it to understand some of the potential negatives of trusts, okay? We've got to understand whether they're actually used for the purposes that they're established and how they might be misused. So we have the person who sets up the trust is the settlor. A trustee can be a company because they're a legal person. The terms of the trust are generally have to be set out in a trust deed, particularly in business settings. And the trustee has a fiduciary obligation to look after the property for the beneficiaries. Now, in reality, many people watching this video might be part of a family trust. Why are they part of that family trust? Well, there's an element about maybe the family was trying to look after each other, etc., in case someone died, etc. But also, they're often used as a way to minimise taxation. Well, how does that occur? Well, let's think about it. What can happen in a trustee is if the trust is running the business. If the trust is running the business, so we've got the trust, the trustee is running the business on behalf of these beneficiaries, right? Now, just say you were running a business as a sole trader and you made $100,000 in profit, so you're going to have to pay tax on that. And so off the top of my head, let's just say you get your first $20,000 tax-free and then just say you paid a fifth tax on the rest. And I'm doing that to make things easy. So that means you would have to pay a fifth of $80,000, right? So a fifth of $80,000 would be $16,000 tax, okay? And so you would put in your pocket $84,000. Okay, so that's how much you have to spend after paying this tax. So what can happen with a trust is, just say we've got a family of 4 family members. The business makes $100,000, and so you give $25,000 to each family member. That means each family member only pays tax on 5. Because remember, the first $20,000 is a tax-free threshold. Right? So they're paying a fifth of that, means they pay $1,000 tax, which means they only pay $4,000 tax, which means the family can take home $96,000 in their pocket, as opposed to $84,000 in the pocket. Look, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. There are all kinds of legal hurdles, particularly recently, around doing it, but this has been a major motivation behind the use of family trusts. There are also lots of potential problems with this. For instance, is every beneficiary going to pool their money, right? Which is not the same as you getting it and paying tax if you're the one who's running the business, really. So, lots of challenges with that, but I think you should be aware of why trusts can get used and why there are so many trusts in the Australian business environment. We've looked at sole traders, we've looked at partnerships, and we've looked at trusts. The one we've really got left to look at is the big one, companies. So let's get into companies in the next little video.